Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel, Dave D Fishing. So in this video I will be showing you how I make Tautog jigs. So I don't use a ton of Tautog jigs throughout the year, with the two seasons being in that year, so spring and fall. So I might make about 30 of them a year. I usually do them in this green or in this bright orange right here. I don't know if the color makes a difference, but those are the only two colors I use. And I'm usually dropping these things into the rock gardens, fishing for these Tautogs. They do get expensive if you were to go buy these from a tackle shop. I think they're like $2 to $3 a piece is what it comes out to, so they get expensive pretty quick. But if you get your own stuff, i.e. your powder coat or paint powder as they call it, and you could get a lead melting pot and a couple blocks of lead, you could go make your own jigs for much less, as far as if you were to compare quantity to quantity. If you were to go to the tackle shop and buy 10 jig heads there and maybe make your own jig heads, the overall cost for making your own would be much less, and you can make much more jigs out of the materials you already have. So in this video I'm going to be using these size 4 mustad hooks, and I'm going to be using this jig mold right here. So this is the Sparky jig head mold. So whatever jig head style you might choose, just make sure it looks like this somewhat, so that the bottom of the jig head is flat and it will land flat in the bottom with the hook facing upward. So it comes in, we flip this around, 3/4 of an ounce, 1 ounce, and 1.5 ounces. I usually only use the 1 ounce and 1.5 ounce. So on the bottom right here, you'll see the hook style that you will need for this mold right here. So again, I don't have the eagle claw hooks. I found these mustad 4/0 hooks. Let me see if I can get a good zoom up on that. These guys right here. So these are much sharper than the eagle claw ones that I found. And then as far as hook sizes for each jig head, I know that one says 4/0, 5, and 6, but you can cram that 4/0 hook into this 1.5 ounce jig head spot. So I have a 4/0 hook right here. We cram that in there. And it fits pretty well. There's no leaks or anything like that, but it'll fit just like that right there. Fits nice and flush is how it's supposed to fit. And then when I close it, absolutely no space in there, so it fits nice and tight. There's going to be no leaks with the lead in there. Just make sure when you get ready to pour your lead, you clamp down on this nice and tight so there is no space here, otherwise you're going to come out with messy jig heads, and you don't want that. Alright guys, so as far as tools, you will need obviously your lead melting pot. I got this off Bass Pro for, I think it was 50 bucks or so. The lead that you will need, you could buy blocks of it online, or you can go to a auto salvage yard, and often they will have those little lead weights from the wheels there, and you could probably buy some off of them. I've done that in the past. You will need a crusty spoon to scrape off debris off the lead as you're melting it, because if you leave that debris on there, you're going to come out with some crummy looking jig heads. And after you pull those jig heads out of the mold, you will need something to snip the excess lead off your mold. I just use these guys right here. You can use whatever you want, as long as it gets the business done. And then you will need a file to clean up those sharp little edges or excess edges that you can't clip off with the nips or whatever you're using. So I use this guy right here. You're going to need some heat resistant gloves. I have my welding gloves right here. So you also need some protective eyewear of some sort and a mask. And you need a well ventilated area to be doing this. Do not do this inside. I know some places that make leads, they have really good ventilation systems. I'm just going to do it outside to be safe. Also, another safety thing is, if you are melting lead, try your best not to get any water in it, obviously, or drip water in it. I know some people sweat a lot. I've heard stories of people sweating and they get some in the pot while it's melting. It will explode and it will burn you. So just be careful of any moisture or anything dripping around you. Like, I'm outside right now, it had just snowed and the snow is melting, so I don't obviously want that to drip in there and cause me injury. Alright, and as far as the powder paint that I will be using, I'm just using this ProTech stuff. I bought it at Bass Pro Shop. I forget how much it was, but it gets the job done. It's pretty durable for what it is. It is a one-step paint finish, so you dip it in there, you let it harden up, and that's really it. Alright guys, the last thing you'll need is a little map torch. So you will use this to heat up the jig head again. So when you're heating up this jig head, do not hold it in one spot for a long time. Just sort of wave that jig head over the flame. Once you feel it's warm enough, dip it into that powder coat and just give it a tap once you've dipped it in there and shake off that excess, and then the heat from the jig head will help evenly distribute that paint. And just roll the jig head after it's been coated. Just hold it like this. I actually have a couple already done. So you hold it like this after you've dipped it in, roll it over, go like this, and then you'll see the paint actually evenly spread out. So yeah, that's it. Let's get into making these jig heads. So this lead melting pot takes about 10 minutes to get up to temp in order to start melting your lead. Next, once your lead is melted, you got to scoop up all that debris off the top. That's all old corrosion and contaminants, so just scoop that out and set it to the side. Your lead should look like this just before you pour it, nice and clean. Next step is to put your hook of choice in the mold. Just make sure they're nice and flush and where they need to be in order to prevent leaks. Once your hooks are in, just do a final check and make sure your mold is shut properly so you don't have leaks. When pouring your lead into the mold, you want a nice, steady, uninterrupted stream. If there are interruptions in the stream, you're going to come out with a jig head with a lot of defects in it. Once the lead has been poured, give those jig heads about 10 to 15 seconds to cool off, and you should be able to remove them from the mold. They still are hot enough to burn you, so just make sure you're handling these things with gloves. Here's what the jig head looks like straight out of the mold, so we have to get rid of that excess material. So we're just going to clip that off. And then we have to get rid of the extra lead that's around the shank of the hook. You just give that a twist with your pliers or your snips and that should come right off. Next we have to file down the nose of the jig head where we cut off that extra material. So just take a file to it. Lead's pretty soft, so this is pretty quick to do. So now just use your torch and we're going to lightly heat the jig head. So I normally heat the jig head until you see the glaze just barely disappear. It's hard to see on camera, but trust me, it happens. Do not hold the flame in one spot for a long time, otherwise it will melt the lead. And also another pointer is put a piece of paper underneath your work area where you're going to be putting the powder on, because you can often dump that powder and reuse it if you put it back into your container. You can take a small object and just clear that extra powder coat out of the eye of the jig. It's a good time to do it and it looks nice and neat. Just for fun, I'm going to show you can add some more colors to your jig head, but you have to do this while the jig head is hot. So you just go ahead and sprinkle whatever color it is you want to do, just like so. The heat that's already in the jig head should be enough to melt that extra color you put on there, so you should be fine. Just wait a minute and it should flatten out nicely. And this is what that jig head looked like after it was all done. I was getting bored, so I'm just dumping some glitter into my green paint powder. Curious to see what this looks like. Just give it a shake to make sure it's all evenly distributed, and we're going to see what this ends up looking like. So here's a good example of stuff that can go wrong while you're putting powder paint on your jig head. So if you look here, you can see a bunch of bubbles there, so don't get too upset by this. Just wait a second. You can add a little bit of heat and often those little bubbles will pop. Just like so, you can sit there and watch them. Another thing that can go wrong is that after those bubbles pop, it might leave a little bit of lead exposed, so don't worry. You can go ahead and take a pinch of that color you had used for your jig head and just sprinkle a little bit on there. And the heat that's already in the jig head should melt that, and that little exposed piece of lead should disappear. Once you've painted your jig heads, just hang them on like a coat hanger or off to the side somewhere. I'm just using this log, so I'm just poking the hook through the log. Just make sure the jigs are not touching each other or the thing you have hung them on. You should be good. So the glitter finish with that green actually came out really nice. So I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you at least found it entertaining. Please like, comment, subscribe.